She wakes up in a retirement home. Her daughter-in-law planned everything, but she forgot one detail. When this elderly woman opened her eyes, she found herself in a strange environment that looked like a hospital bed. A part of her head ached terribly, as if someone had hit her with a pan. Where was she? Why couldn't she remember anything? How did she get to sit here? She shut her eyes tightly and slowly began to remember the frightening events that had led up to this moment. Alice lived in a two-bedroom apartment that her husband had received from his workplace before passing away. She shared the house with her son. Harry and the two understood each other perfectly, or they thought they did until Harry got married and his wife, Ivy, moved in. From the first day she got in, she never understood her mother-in-law. How do you live in this place? The kitchen, utensils, furniture, and everything are just so old. I would need to replace them, Ivy said, making no attempt to hide her irritation. Alice, on the other hand, wasn't having any of that. For Christ's sake. Everything in the home held beautiful memories she had shared with her husband. This is my home and I will use what I want. Everything in this house has a beautiful story to it. If you want to have yours, you can move out. Since Alice refused to do things the way her daughter-in-law wanted, Ivy thought the woman hated her and she was hellbent on reciprocating it. The next day, she asked Alice to take all the books on the shelf out. There are so many dusty books. When we have a child, do you want them eating and drinking this dust? Ivy said. But what you didn't know was these books were also very precious to Alice. Look, you're Ivy, you can dust the books off, but it won't have you throwing them out. If you want to make any changes, wait until I'm gone. These arguments and heated conversations went on until Harry could no longer stand it. So he rented an apartment and moved out with his wife. Despite moving out, he continued visiting Alice. During one of these visits, he told his mom they were expecting a child. However, he asked if she could make peace with his wife. We would need you more than ever once the child comes, he pleaded. I need you more than you need me. But Ivy finds fault with everything I do. It doesn't seem she wants to get along with me, Alice said. Then Harry promised they would find a way, but these arguments continued. Then one day Alice was taking a walk when she met a man, Richard, who was out for a stroll. To that day, the two had a beautiful and long conversation. Richard was a childless widower and had only longed for one thing since wife passed, a friend and true companion, and the moment he met Alice, he felt something beautiful. As for Alice, she felt like a 16-year-old in love. The two soon decided to take things further, and they got into a relationship. So Alice invited Ivy and Harry to dinner, and she introduced Semelon to them. Semelon, meet my son and my daughter-in-law. Then to Harry and Ivy, she said, Simon is going to move in here soon and live with me. Afterward, Semelon greeted the couple and told them they could move into his one-bedroom apartment. It's not a big and beautiful place like this, but you don't have to pay rent, he said and flashed a warm smile. But everyone was shocked by what happened next. Ivy was so pissed with the suggestion. You want to move into this big house, and he asked us to move into your rat hole. Never, she said, banged the table and dashed out. Harry was so embarrassed by his wife's attitude. I am so sorry. I'm sorry. It's probably the pregnancy hormones, he said and rushed out. Alice was speechless, and she felt so embarrassed by her daughter-in-law's action. Alice was still remembering these ugly details from the past when a sharp headache suddenly brought her back to present reality. How did she get into this hospital room? Just then, the door opened and a stern-looking nurse, Charlotte, walked up to her. Without saying any words, she checked Alice's temperature and a pulse. Hi, sweetheart. Can you help me? How did I get here? Alice said warmly, but the woman's response only made her realize she was in a deep mess. Freely. Did you forget what you did to that old woman on the street? How violent you were. For God's sake, you could have hurt her. Alice was so confused her head began to seriously ache. What are you saying? I didn't hurt anyone. I am not out of my mind, she cried, but the nurse injected her and walked away. A few minutes later, another elderly woman, Helen, walked in and introduced herself. Hello, I'm Helen, and you're Alice, right? I know you have a lot of questions, and I'm here to help. This place is a home for the elderly, and most of us here were brought in by relatives who didn't want us. Let me guess, you have a lot of savings and perhaps some properties, right? Alice was now more confused than ever, but she was relieved she had found someone to talk to. Yes, I have property and savings, but my son would never do this to me. Besides, they shouldn't keep us here against our will. Ella said, no one outside knows what is happening here. Everyone is registered with a diagnosis. Some have dementia and schizophrenia, but not everyone here is sick. Most are brought against their will. Unfortunately, we would never be able to leave here, but nothing's wrong with me. I'm not sick. I'm fine, Alice screamed. Now all the tears she had been holding back flowed out. Then Helen whispered, have you been feeling any strange symptoms of late? Don't you remember anything? At that moment, Alice shut her eyes tightly and recalled. She had been feeding a lot, but it only happened whenever her daughter-in-law was around. I think she is irresponsible about this. She hated the sight of me. I'm sure my son and Simon will find me, Alice said, but Helen asked her not to get her hopes high. So what do you do now? I do not belong here. We need to leave. Alice trembled. We cannot do anything yet. Do you see that nurse that injected you a few minutes ago? She is a real monster. At first, I wanted to leave, but she overpowered me. She injected me and I became very weak for days. Helen's revelation made Alice so scared that she suddenly grabbed her new friend's hands and said, if we need to leave here, they could harm us. Do you really want to leave? Of course, Helen replied. I have been planning my escape for months. I know everything that happens here. Relatives who do not want their elderly ones come here and Charlotte gives them some drugs to take home to them. Once they take the drugs, they start hallucinating and acting weird and even suffer seizures. Then a few weeks after they end up here, what else do you know? Alice whispered, there is a good nurse here, Nurse Aurea. She is willing to help me out. She trusts me, but I have no relatives to call. Do you have anyone? Alice then said she only trusted her son and Simon, who was a retired military personnel. Yes, Simon, the retired military personnel. That's the right person to call. Do you know his number? Helen asked, and Alice nodded positively. Then the women hugged each other, hoping their escape plan would work. Now all they had to do was wait for the good nurse to come to work the next day. The next evening, Aurea came into the room and then ran towards her like she was their savior. Aurea looked around, and when she was sure no one was watching, she handed out her phone and said, you have 3 minutes. Then she disappeared into thin air. With trembling fingers, Alice dialed Simon's number, and after several rings, he finally picked up. Hey, it's me, Alice. I will give you all the details later. You need to help me. I'm counting on you. Alice wept and disclosed her location. About 30 minutes later, the sound of a police siren filled the entire area. Help has come, Alice said happily and ran to the window. The policeman stormed the building and went straight to the head nurse's office. Simon also went after his missing lady, and he soon found her and Helen in their room. The two broke into a passionate hug, and Simon said, Ivy lied to me. She said you were sick and you were in a nursing home. She even lied to Harry and wouldn't let us come to see you. Harry was away for work, and she just called both of us to say she had rushed you to a nursing home. She said she didn't want to see any of us, and it would only make you more sick. I missed you every single day, Alice. The couple then went home happily, and Alice asked Ellen to stay over for some days. When Harry heard what his wife did, he was devastated. Of course, justice prevailed. The head nurse and Ivy were locked up. While in prison, Ivy gave birth to a son, and Harry took him to the joy of Simon and Alice. Later on, Harry and Aurea fell in love. He soon divorced his wife and married Aurea, and they lived happily. Simon, of course, moved in with Alice and vowed to always protect her.